In this video, I'm going to be building a $600 gaming PC build that you can actually buy the parts for right now in 2021. I'm going to be revisiting one of my most popular video concepts of the year and talking about whether this unnamed budget graphics card is really worth your cash. Regular viewers will notice this video is a bit different. I'm doing it from home, not from the studio, as I've been pinged by track and trace here in the UK and I'm not allowed to leave the house until Sunday. So quarantine build it is. Let's do this. I'm going to kick things off by installing as many components into the motherboard as possible. This is the Gigabyte B560M DS3H. This is an awesome budget motherboard that works well with the CPU choice for today's system, Intel's brand new Core i5-11400F. Now some of you are going to be confused why I've gone Intel for a build like this. Well, the new 11400F is cheaper than most Ryzen options on the market, but gives you 6 cores, 12 threads, and some great multi-threaded performance. Not only that, it would work well with a 3060 or 3060 Ti, allowing you to upgrade this build really easily later down the line. With it being an Intel CPU, we will need to pick up an aftermarket cooler, as the one included is frankly rubbish, so the Cooler Master Hyper 212 RGB Black Edition does the job nicely and comes in around about $30, making it a pretty unbeatable choice. I'm also going to install the RAM or the memory into the motherboard. I've picked up ADATA's XPG Gamix D20 and it's available in either 8 or 16GB configurations. To begin with, I'd pick up a singular 8GB DIMM for this build and this spec, and then I'd go ahead and add a second one in when you upgrade your graphics card to a 30 series card, if that's something you have the money for a bit later down the line. This board and CPU really are an awesome combination. If the stock situation on Ryzen 3 CPUs was better, then I'd definitely consider those at around $99. But for now, the i5-11400F makes complete sense. This board also has 4 RAM DIMM slots, which is awesome, not only for dual channel memory performance, but also for future upgrades later on down the line. So it's really nice to see Gigabyte include this on what is undoubtedly a much more budget SKU motherboard. The next stage of the build then is to install the CPU cooler. Now for this we need to spin the motherboard around to the rear and locate these 4 holes around the CPU. We're then going to take this back plate, which you get included with the cooler, whoopsie daisy, and that is going to really nicely slot through each of the holes. Once we've done this, we're just able to spin the motherboard around, mount some nuts onto each of the 4 posts now showing through the motherboard, and then secure the cooler into place. It really is nice and simple. With our motherboard assembly done, we can go ahead and move this into the case shortly. But first, I wanted to touch on the SSD, as I'm a bit worried that in this smaller space, the case is just going to take up the whole frame and you won't be able to see anything. This is the storage choice for this system. It's Seagate's Barracuda Q1, and it's a pretty decent 2.5-inch SSD. It's absolutely on the budget end of the spectrum, and an NVMe drive would be better if you had a bit more budget. But you can read our full review of this drive and see some speed tests on your screen now in the card section, if you'd like to learn a little bit more about it. For now though, as I say, let's move the motherboard assembly over into the case for today's build, which is a little bit of a special choice. Specifically, this is a chassis from a company called Neutron Lab, and as you can see, it takes a bit more room in the studio than it normally would. This is a really great budget choice available here in the UK, not so sure about the US, so I'll link some alternatives in the description below. It's actually kind of got Cooler Master H500M vibes from a couple of years ago, with this really cool kind of scaffold design at the front and 2 large 200mm fans. I've actually reviewed this case and others over on eBuyer's channel, so you can go and watch the videos I made for them in the card section as well. It comes in at a pretty affordable price point and has lots of mod cons like tempered glass, nearly lost the case there, and will work really well for the system. When it comes to the chassis, you want to take off as many side panels as you can to begin with, and that will make screwing the motherboard in that little bit easier. And then we can go ahead and really easily screw in both the motherboard with the included standoff screws, and then eventually, of course, the SSD, which sits nicely on top of the power supply shield. That brings us nicely on to the next component today, the penultimate part, the graphics card. Now, this build is going to be a bit controversial to some people, as I'm recommending that you pick up a GT 1030. That's right, if you're looking to build a budget system, this is the card for you. A lot of people get very obsessed about APUs, but some really good testing recently from Gamers Nexus showed the 1030 still holds its own, even against the brand new AMD APUs that were announced recently. This is also a great stopgap measure until GPU prices properly come back down. You could put this system together today with a GT 1030 that's readily available for the $100 mark, and then swap it out for say a 3060 later on, and you're not going to lose any money. If you bought a 2060 today, you'd pay $600, $700, $800 maybe, and you're never going to get any of that extra money back. The 1030 as well performs impressively well. The 1030 is actually a really impressive card as far as performance is concerned, and holds its own at 1080p medium settings in some of the most popular titles. The 1030 is actually a much more capable card than many people think, especially at 1080p medium settings. We ran through a large number of the most popular titles out there, and as you'll see, got some fairly good results actually. It's not just GTA, Apex and Overwatch though where we got some good results. Fortnite saw us get 63 FPS on average at 1080p competitive settings, and while this isn't as good as the 200 you might find on a 3060 at a comparable configuration, it is still enough to drive a good 60Hz monitor and provide a pretty enjoyable gaming experience. Valorant gave us 227 frames a second, which is definitely a lot more impressive than Fortnite, and shows the 1030 is not to be discounted. Rainbow Six Siege gave us 64 FPS on average when we tested the game with its inbuilt benchmarking mode, once again keeping us above that all-important 60 FPS mark. The frame rate, remember, used by most consoles nowadays. CS GO was the final game we tested on the list, and here we got 123 FPS on average. One of the more easier titles to run, but still a very popular esports game, and this 1030 build handles it pretty well. Don't let size deceive you either, as although the 1030 is a really small card, it's actually got a bit of punch. I think we all get so obsessed nowadays with ray tracing, DLSS and 4K that we forget what gaming you can actually achieve on a budget. The card is going to look a little bit silly in the system as well today, but of course this is intended for future upgrade paths and upgradability, and the card will fit really nicely into this top PCIe slot, a little something like this. That thing is ridiculous. It brings us nicely on though to the last component today, at the final part before we actually power the system up and see how good it looks when it's all booted up. And that is of course the power supply. The unit in question is Cooler Master's MWE 500 watt. It's about the cheapest power supply I would ever recommend, but has more than enough wattage for this build and even some upgrades later on. That GPU requires next to no power, meaning the system is super efficient. Once we've gone ahead and screwed this into place, powered all of our components up, we can boot the system up and see how good it looks in typical GeekaWhat style with an epic glam montage. Thank you very much for watching, but roll that montage.